Hi, this is Randall from the Eric W. Gritsch Memorial Fund. We're being joined again for the first time in almost a year by Brach Jennings from Baden, Germany. Brach was the winner of the Eric W. Gritsch Memorial Fund Scholarship for Theological Research back in 2019. Brach was a PhD student at the Lutheran School of Theology in Chicago, used the scholarship to partly fund studies at the University of Tübingen in Germany for a semester to study under renowned Luther scholars. And through a combination of opportunities and ingenuity, Brach managed to stay in Germany, enroll, finish the dissertation and doctorate there. So here we are several years later, and Brach's passed the dissertation magna cum laude, since Brach probably won't mention that part, and has redirected to the German state churches, specifically to the United Protestant Church of Baden, with plans for ordination and ministry in Germany. I mean, wow. Welcome back, Brach. Please correct me if any of that wasn't exactly completely accurate. And can you give us a little recap of exactly where you are now and how you made this transition?
Emphasis on little. Well, Randy, it's great to be back with you. And it is almost exactly a year since we last talked. And for our listeners, Randy and I were joking before we started this interview that I seem to talk to him whenever I'm moving, because last year we caught up and I was moving out of the Evangelische Stift, and now literally I'm moving out again. I have lived in a wonderful apartment for a year with a good friend of mine in the Tübingen Weststadt, and now I'm on my way. So the only thing, well, there are two little things I would quote unquote correct. I'm not technically in what you meant by Baden. I'm still in Tübingen. And so it's actually one state. It's Baden-Württemberg. There aren't two states, but there are two churches. And there's the Church of Württemberg, and Tübingen is part of that. And there's the Church of Baden, which is where I'm going. And literally, I'm moving to Pforzheim, Germany on the 26th of August. I've forgotten how many days that is. Is that 5 or 6 days? Something like that. And then I will be beginning my vicariat, which is the training to be a pastor in Germany, and that's 2 years. Ironically, my first 2.5 weeks, I won't even be in Pforzheim. I will be whisked away to the seminary in Heidelberg to learn all about teaching children in the public schools, because that's one of the things that we do over here. That I never did in America, obviously, because we don't have, at least as far as I know, religion lessons in the public schools in the States, but they have that here in Germany. So I get to learn all about how to do that for my first couple weeks in the vicariat, and then even perhaps the first month or two in total of the vicariat will be mostly or primarily focused on work in elementary school. So it is surely a switch from anything I ever would have expected, but I'm delighted. And you asked for a recap, and here I am telling you about the future. Well, typical systematician, I can't give a clear answer. Sorry, small joke. But as far as a recap, oh, I guess there was one other thing that I would just make a small quote unquote correction. When I was awarded the Gritsch Fellowship, that was specifically to come and study with Jürgen Moltmann for a semester. That turned into something very different than a semester with Dr. Moltmann and then flying back to Chicago to finish the doctorate at the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago. I met my mentor and friend, the wonderful Luther scholar, Volker Lippin, and I asked him to be my secondary supervisor. And for some reason, as we joke now, he said yes. And that, I think, began the transition to coming to Tübingen. And Dr. Moltmann very graciously then agreed to be the first supervisor of my dissertation in Germany, whereas before he was the secondary supervisor in Chicago. So I like to say he and Volker switched places somehow. Volker became the second and Dr. Maltman became the first. And then Linda Thomas, my beloved teacher from the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago and wonderful womanist theologian and anthropologist, she became, rather than my co-supervisor at LSTC, a special third outside reviewer of the dissertation. So there was all this switching that was going on in my first semester. I think we all probably laugh about it now. I didn't have a clue in hell what was going on, frankly, excuse my language, but I was totally not expecting any of this. And it was just so many major things happening that as I look back, I can see the Holy Spirit. I'm a fan of Wolfhart Pannenberg's notion of eschatology, that you really understand it at the end. It's a retroactive thing, and I have come to the end. Now, of course, he means that in terms of the life of Jesus, so I'm expanding Pannenberg a little bit here, but this is where I'm getting the idea from, that I really can see now the movement of the Spirit, these years later, whereas at the time I had my hands in the air. What in the world is going on? What am I thinking? I've asked a church historian to be my secondary supervisor. I'm not a church historian. It's been years since I dealt with church history, and believe me, during the dissertation, I really asked what I was thinking. And it turned out to be, on the other side of it, this, I don't think this is an overstatement, probably the richest time of my studies. And I studied for 16 years straight through. I would never do that again, by the way. But of my 16 years, these last 3 years were probably the richest. And that's something else I see now on the other side of the doctorate, of the dissertation.
And a lot of this richness was happening in German, in a whole new language too. So you're going to this whole new part of your life, this whole new direction, and with most of it in the German language, and you've had to some Hebrew and all of that along the way.
Well, yeah. So I don't want to overstate myself. This might disappoint you a little bit. I did write my dissertation in English, and there were some pragmatic reasons for doing that. Number one, I specifically wanted it to be able to be received by an international audience. And so I knew that really then it needed to be in English. I used a whole lot of German in the dissertation, though. I mean, it's really, there's German all over the place in there. So I didn't shy away from that. And I often critiqued, well, not often, but at least a bit critiqued the American edition of Luther's works, where I felt they didn't read the German correctly, which was a great exercise for me as I was learning the language. But yes, there was a lot of German going. I mean, Dr. Maltman and I speak really only German now, and we've done that for a couple of years when we see one another. And my German just sort of kept going up and up like this, and my friends here would confirm that's really what they saw happening, especially after I got put on the list for the vicariat in Baden. So much changed for me. It's really since we last talked, actually, and because as my place in the church became secure, I noticed my academics getting a lot better. And I'm not saying they were bad previously. I don't think they were bad, but there was such a focus of zeroing in. Like I had a reason to do the dissertation beyond even what I had before. And I had a reason to get better at German, frankly. Whereas before it was like, okay, I'm coming over here, spending a semester with Dr. Maltman, going back to Chicago. Then it was, I'm coming over here, I'm going to stay in Tübingen, write my dissertation, and then go back to the States. Now it's, I came here, I wrote my dissertation, oh, right, and I'm not coming back, actually. And so this is you know.
Well, we haven't really talked since you were closing in on your dissertation. I think, do you have to defend it over there the way that you do over here and everything? What was that process like? I don't know what you went through at all there.
Oh, you can't write it any better than what I went through, actually. But so I can't make a universal statement for a German doctorate in theology is like X, because it does depend on the university. But Tübingen does the older model, and the doctor of theology that Tübingen wants you to do involves at the end what's called, for those who know German, excuse my still very strong American accent, rigororum, and which is actually a Latin word, but anyway. That means that they want you to go into all the disciplines. So my field is systematic theology. I spent most of my time actually with church historians, but my field is systematic theology. And so there's 1 hour on that, and it's an oral exam. And then there were 15-minute tests in the 4 other disciplines, all oral. And that's Old Testament. This is the 5 disciplines in German. So Old Testament, New Testament, church history, systematic theology. And that's what Tübingen wants. Some universities allow for a disputation, a Verteidigung, a defense. That is focused really on the dissertation. But the older model that Tübingen does is this rigororum. And I had a little something working against me that proved to be an advantage in the end. By Tübingen rules, by the Tübingen Theology Faculty's rules, if you pass your dissertation magna cum laude or higher, you are allowed then to shrink the rigororum to 3 subjects, your field plus 2 other disciplines. Well, and Randy, as you let the cat out of the bag, I did in fact pass my dissertation magna cum laude, but there was a slight problem. I'm an American. And so Tübingen has a little problem with somehow with Americans, or maybe not just Americans, but anyone who doesn't come through the German system, taking advantage of that little rule. So I had to do a 5 subject oral exam. And while at first I was frankly not so happy, because I thought, well, I've demonstrated that I can do good work in the dissertation. If others can, shrink it to 3, why can't I? But it came through on the other side to be a very, very good thing, because back to the United Protestant Church of Baden, they actually asked me to do a 5-subject rigororum, regardless of the dissertation grade, because that was how they would declare me equivalent to all of their other pastoral candidates who come in with this is really hard to compare, but they come in with a German MDiv. It's not an MDiv, but for comparison's sake, they come in with what you and I would think of as a Master of Divinity. And as you might know, all of my theology training before, and all of my academic training in general before Tübingen is American. And so all Baden asked me was to do a 5-subject rigororum. And so long as that was done, they would declare me equivalent. And so I love now to say to my colleagues, I don't have an exam, a first theological exam. That's what the Germans call it. I just have a rigororum and a dissertation. I missed out on the other part. But anyway, it's a small joke I like to make. So the reason I said you can't write it any better is I ended up only having 7 weeks total to prepare for this thing. And as if the 7 weeks isn't hilarious enough, I got the worst influenza I've had in 6 years at the end of April. I mean, worst. I couldn't do anything for 10 days. People talk about COVID. This was worse than COVID. And how do I know? Because then in June, I got COVID. So I have 7 weeks to prepare for this thing. I get the worst influenza of my life, and then I get COVID. the fact that I passed and kept my magna cum laude grade is really a miracle somehow.
Back to the medical, are you on the other side of all of that now? Are you 90%, 95%? What are you?
Well, I think I was, I mean, unless I get COVID again, which I have been told, news to me. See, I was so dumb. I thought, well, you get it once, and it's sort of like, when you get your flu shot and you might get sick once and then you're immune to it. No, you can get it again. So unless I get it again, which I'm still being careful, of course, I'm fine. I bounce back quicker from the COVID than I did from the influenza, and I'm not trying to minimize COVID. I think it's just I got the minor variant. I got the 9 days and done variant, and 2 of the days were awful. I was cursing God in those 2 days and said, "Who says God is good?" And well, it happens. And the other 7 were fine. I was like, compared to the influenza, this is not. I mean, the influenza I got, I'm not kidding. I was in bed for 10. I was absolutely miserable in those 10 days. I couldn't read anything. But somehow I passed the exams.
Grace under pressure and all that. You've
something like that. And systematics was a blast. And Geisha Linda, our wonderful new dogmatics professor, who examined me in systematics, that was just so much fun. That was so fun.
The book you've got for publication, is that your dissertation or something else? Okay, gotcha. What's the keep going.
Oh, sorry. Maybe I'm talking too much. Just interrupt me, please. This was during my systematics exam that Geisha Linda joked with me after. She said I couldn't get a word in otherwise. So please interrupt me. So in Germany, and this I can now make a universal statement. In Germany, a German universal statement. When you do the Doctor of Theology, you may not yourself use the title Dr. Theol until your dissertation is published. That doesn't mean that I haven't been, as the Germans call it, promoted. I have been. As a matter of fact, I have my letter from the dean that says that I was promoted on the 5th of July and all that stuff. But the title, Dr. Theol, can first be used after the dissertation, after the requisite number of copies of the printed dissertation are delivered to the faculty. And so I have taken my book to, and that's just standard practice. I took my book to Morsiebeck, and which has become probably my favorite German theology publisher. And I took it to them just a couple of days ago. As a matter of fact, you had emailed me, whenever that was that you emailed me. I literally had dropped it off an hour before I got your email. And by drop it off, welcome to Tübingen, I walked over there, took it to the editor. Well, I sent her the book by the email, but I took the dissertation reviews to the editor and handed it to her. It felt like something out of like the 1960s. It was great. But I thought to myself, this is somehow really unique to Tübingen. Tübingen is one of the last places that has this in relation to theology and humanities in general, where not everything must yet be electronic, if you live here anyway. So that was a really lovely experience. I revised the dissertation. I spent a month on it, revising it and clearing up some things and noting some more limitations of the work and sharpening up a few footnotes, cutting a few footnotes out. I had cut most of the idiotic footnotes. I had only had a couple of those that I thought were absolutely idiotic. On the other side, I got rid of those and added some more and, that kind of stuff, and cleaned up some typos. Oh my God, I was horrified. And then took it to them.
What was the title?
Theologia Crucis from Martin Luther to James Cone, a constructive transfiguration.
That's pretty cool. One of the things that really got us interested in you was that you were interested in Cone, you were interested in Barth, and we liked your research. And then since you've gone over there, you've told me that becoming more Barthian than more Lutheran has influenced your system. Is that still rolling along? You still consider?
Well, I don't know. Did I say? Did I call myself more Barthian than Lutheran?
Maybe.
We
could look at the video. But
oh no! Don't hold me to that. I was in the throes of a dissertation. Okay, my theology was changing every other day writing that thing. I had. So I love that Geisha Linda has come to the faculty. I mentioned her. She's the person that examined me in systematics. Because she reminded me this semester, I had the real privilege of sitting in on her dogmatics lecture for the students, and she really reminded me what I treasure about Luther and the Lutheran tradition. And I never forgot that. I mean, over 100 pages of my dissertation are devoted to Luther and Luther research. And I was always, even when I got to Cone, it was in the footnotes is how Cone's theology transfigures the Heidelberg Disputation, how Cone might indeed in Black theology and Black power be drawing from Luther's freedom of a Christian, so it was never, Luther was never far away from me, but what Geisha really reminded me, and what I'm so grateful to her for, is those gems in Luther, such as not looking to the heights but looking to the depths to find God. The Luther's dialectic, if I might use that word, between the hidden God and the revealed God, and I devoted a chapter of my dissertation to bondage of the will, so I had dealt with it, but I don't know, she sort of put a different level on that. And I mentioned before, I spent most of my time in Tübingen with church historians, not with systematic theologians. And I love all my friends who are church historians. They were all so good to me, even as they endlessly tormented me as the systematician among them, but they were all so good to me. Helping me with my work, but now having somebody working in dogmatics, working in real proper dogmatics, she has I don't know if you know Eberhard Jungel. He and Maltmann were the two, and then Oswald Bayer. They were the three really big systematicians of Maltmann's generation here in Tübingen, and she has Jungel's chair, and Jungel was then succeeded by Christoph Schwerbel, who was also a wonderful dogmatician. And I only got to meet him once because he retired from Tübingen and went to St. Andrews, and he catastrophically died actually in September. And he died just a few days before Eberhard Jungel did. And so it was really, I was going, oh my God, all the great theologians of Tübingen are are not here. And Hans Kern died 6 months before that. So I was going somewhere with that. Oh, the notion of a Lutheran working in dogmatics, somebody who really wanted to really be digging into Luther's theology in dogmatic ways, was really a gift for me this semester, just as, and I was just sitting in there for fun. She told me, well, it might be a little boring for you, but it never was. I was just like, oh my God, I get to soak this up. Because before I had done, I did a lot of Old Testament actually with my wonderful Hebrew professor, Heinz Dieter Neef. And I kept sitting in on his lectures, and I did that again this semester. And then, but to have it, and before that in Volker Lepine's truly marvelous church history lectures, but he's not here anymore. He went to Yale.
He went to America and you stayed there.
And he is one of the reasons that I that I did stay, because he was the one who officially got the ball rolling to get me to Baden.
Very nice.
So that was a whole. I don't know. Somehow I don't know if you know the philosopher Slavoj Žižek, but I feel a bit like Slavoj Žižek at the moment, and Žižek just like puts all this stuff out there, and somewhere there's a point, and I feel like I'm doing or risking doing the same thing. So sorry about that. I love Žižek, but sometimes you go, is there an argument here?
Well, this whole United Protestant Churches, it's even Wikipedia, it's a combination Reformed and Lutheranism, but at the same time, I'm kind of wondering how you would define the difference between them if they had, how would you do that?
He's asking harder questions than my doctoral exams here. Let me think a second. What do you mean by differences between them? Do you mean the various united churches, or what it means to be a united church rather than a Lutheran church?
A combination of Lutheran and Reform, as opposed to just Lutheran. What does the Reform aspect of it bring into it? I mean, I know things like the Protestant churches of Germany are much more LGBTQ friendly, which is part of why you're there, and that they do female ordination too. But the way I saw it presented, it made me think that there are other churches in Germany that don't, Protestant churches in Germany that might not.
Well, there are some more free church oriented Protestants that might not ordain women, and they certainly wouldn't ordain LGBT people. But the United Church, and again, I really am only getting to know Baden, so I want to be careful before I start talking about other bodies that I've never been to. But let me just say what it is for Baden, at least as I'm coming to know it. So it's a historical thing. Wow, I've spent too much time with church historians. It's a historical thing that goes back to the 19th century. And for Baden, the Reformed Protestants and the Lutheran Protestants were asking, how can we come together as a common church? And these are just very broad overviews, right? And so they formed, in many steps in between, of course, but they form a common catechism about the sacrament. And it actually is in our confessions presented as a catechism. And the real sticking point for us Lutherans and then Reformed historically, it is telling that I just identified myself as a Lutheran, by the way. I want that clear, lest it be seen that Bart was having too much influence on me. For us Lutherans, the sticking point always was, what do we do about the Lord's Supper? Because Lutherans have always said Jesus Christ is truly and bodily present in the sacrament. Well, for Reformed Christians who follow Zwingli in Switzerland, and there are some, I suppose, who do, you're meditating on the story of the Passion and what Christ has done for you on the cross, but he's not present in the sacrament. It's not, I want to be careful to be charitable towards Zwingli, but because I think for him, Christ is present somehow in the community, in the community of the gathered, but not in the sacrament, the way it is for Luther, right? And for Luther, I'll risk that I'm now speaking to a Lutheran audience, so I won't go, into a depth on this, right? Because we sort of know this. But for Luther, it really is a bodily presence. Is means is. And when I was teaching this, I always, in the parish in America, I always used to make the joke, Zwingli and Bill Clinton had something in common. Neither one of them could understand the meaning of the word is. And it worked great in the States. Doesn't work so well here in Germany. But Calvin, the genius Calvin, he really is a genius. He sort of is a mediator between Zwingli and Luther. And so for him, the Holy Spirit makes Christ present in the sacrament. And then there's you're somehow taken to heaven. You're lifted up, and there's a spiritual presence in the sacrament, but it is a presence. It's not, Calvin would not have agreed with Zwingli, and if I might be just a little bit mean here, in terms of a, quote, real absence, which is that's very Lutheran what I just said, but he really wanted to mediate between the both of them. So Calvin's got this great sacramental theology, and because he gets something that Luther doesn't. He makes it Trinitarian. Luther is so concerned about Christology, perhaps rightly so, but he's so concerned about Christology, he doesn't address, at least that I have found, the role of the Spirit in the sacraments, whereas Calvin does. Well, the Reformed congregations in Baden, to my understanding at least, were more on the Calvin side of the Reformation than the Zwinglian side. And if that's the case, it's easier for the Reformed and the Lutherans to come together, because even the later Melanchthon gets toward Calvin's position. Luther wouldn't like any of this, but he's safe in the arms of Jesus. Let's leave him aside for a second. And so what Baden did that I find absolutely brilliant is they said the following: with bread and wine, Christ is truly present. Now, Luther, inconsistent as he generally tends to be, and is a nightmare for systematic theologians, Luther loved these prepositions in, with, under. He didn't care. He just sometimes in and with and under, sometimes in and under, sometimes with, sometimes in. Okay, he's all over the place. But he likes his prepositions so that he can come to an understanding of a sacramental union. I would not call this consubstantiation. I think that's a philosophical term Luther himself wouldn't like. Even if it's true, he still wouldn't have liked it. But he would have liked the notion of sacramental union. Bread and wine, body and blood. So with this great preposition mit in the German, with in the English, with bread and wine, the Lutherans and the Reformed can come together, and this has historical precedent in the Wittenberg Concord, which took place in the 1530s, and it was Butzer, Martin Butzer, a reformer from Strasbourg, who comes up with this compromise. Somehow, by the grace of God, Luther even agreed to it. Now, did he stick to it? That's a different question. But at that point, he was even able to agree, well, one of his prepositions is being used. And you can read that with bread and wine in a very Lutheran way. And so this Baden is building on this all the way back to the Wittenberg Concord, and then also a committee, the Arnoldian theses. I always mix that up. In the 50s, there was some work being done there as well, but that actually comes after when Baden was formed. Baden goes back. We just had our 200-year anniversary last year, actually, so it must be 1821 then. And they were building on the Wittenberg Concord and anticipating the Lauenburg Agreement from 1970. I'm going to get the year wrong, 3. And that was the basis for a common understanding of Eucharist among the Lutherans and the Reformed in Europe. And it was also it's expanded out beyond them now. It's basically Protestant celebration of the Eucharist is in the Lauenburg Agreement, which the ELCA was drawing from when the ELCA got in full communion with the PCUSA, the RCA, and the United Church of Christ. Behind all of that work being done in the States is the Lauenburg Agreement, which Baden, as a so-called confessional union, anticipated by 200 years. It's really a fascinating. I did one of my oral exams on this, by the way, if you're wondering why I'm spitting all this stuff out, because I had to get myself familiar with it. It's really a fascinating story, and I hope that answered your question.
And I like how you worked Calvin in there too. I've enjoyed watching you change or watching you grow with Calvin too. I think one of our first talks, you were reading a biography of Calvin. Then in one of our last talks, you'd read some serious Calvin, and you were reappraising, giving him a little more credit than perhaps you had earlier in your life. And here you are, even your understanding of Calvin is helping you to understand the whole churches of Germany thing even better as you go. So this whole your church history is blossoming in many directions there.
Well, thank you for that. I anchored this just to say where I think the limitation, at least the limitation I can see right now in what I just told you. I anchored this telling you about Baden, and I did that specifically because that's the one that I'm getting to know. There's another kind of union church in Germany, which is a sort of an organizational union, if you will, and that's, the Prussian king says we're going to have this, and once the worship together, slaps the Lutheran and Reformed liturgy together, and it happens so-called from above, and that's where this is the origins of the Missouri Synod Lutherans, actually, because the Missouri Synod was protesting the so-called Prussian Union of the 19th century. It is over this question of the sacrament. Everything I was just talking about. They would not yield on a strict Lutheran confessional, as they understand the term Lutheran confessional, reading of the sacrament. And so the CFW Walter and others hightail it off to the States, and we have the origins. I think the first seminary they established there is Concordia, isn't it, in St. Louis? But then this is something that will impact you directly. The Lutheran Seminary at Gettysburg, the origins of that in Samuel Simon Schmucker, his model was the Union Churches of Germany. That was his model for what he was doing. It wasn't just that he studied at Princeton Seminary, so he got this Reformed influence. There's also this German history going on in these churches over here that is impacting the States. Although, as far as I know, I could be wrong, but I think with him it might have been more that organizational unit in Prussia, rather than there are two churches that I know of, at least, that are confessional unions. One is Baden and one is the Pfalz. And the Pfalz, I don't know that story, so I want to back off there a bit. But I think Schmucker might have been more coming from the Prussian aspect. But anyway, just a little nice Gettysburg connection there.
And so many of the Lutheran theologians in our region are affiliated with that Gettysburg seminary, such as Dr. Gritsch, who was the end of his career was all there. So,
I think if Gritsch had been in Germany, he may well have been united.
Very interesting.
Rather than, that is just my guess, but I could imagine that.
Well, I always like to take at least a little bit of our time to talk about our American in Germany thing going on right now.
Oh, Lord.
And there's always been a part of it, pandemic oriented and everything. And I wanted to ask you what that's like out there, but save a little time because I want to ask you what's going on, the German perspective of the whole war in Ukraine thing too. But as far